Story 1. So this woman swings by the retail spot where I worked and hands in her resume. On her cover letter, it says, "Look me up." Turns out she was a little actress back in the 80s. One of my coworkers decided to Google her, and the first thing that came up was her latest run-in with the law over some not-so-great choices. Story 2. I've been doing background checks for nearly a decade, and I've seen my fair share of wild stuff. But one case that really bugs me is this dude who tried to get a gig with the Boy Scouts in IT. He had 15 different charges for doing some really messed up things to kids under 12. Dude did 20 years for it, and it seems like he thought it just magically disappeared from his record. Story 3. So, not to spill any tea, but when I got my management gig at a previous job, one of my crew let me know that he had teamed up with one of our newer guys before, and this dude seemed super shady. Sadly, there wasn't much I could do with that info at the time, but I quickly saw what he meant. My team was out in the field a lot, and this guy would just disappear, never picked up his phone, and was always taking time off because, apparently, he used to be a cop before my predecessor hired him and claimed he had to go testify in court. A few months later, the same employee who gave me the heads up brought me this news article showing that this guy had been tried and found guilty of writing and cashing fake checks for an elderly person he was supposed to be caring for. The court stuff had nothing to do with him being a cop. He was actually the one in trouble, not a witness. I took all this to HR, and we ended up letting him go. Story 4. So, at my buddy's workplace, they just brought in this new dude, and HR shot out a welcome email with all his deets. Well, someone decided to do a quick Google search and discovered he was actually facing some serious charges for swiping clients' identities from his previous gig. Can you believe it? He got the boot less than an hour after that welcome email went out. Story 5. I'm the candidate. So, my last name is pretty rare, my username is my pen name, and I've got a cousin with a super similar first name who's around the same age as me. You know, like Sean versus Sean. Totally not on purpose. I've had some legal stuff in the past because I was without a home, but nothing too wild. My cousin got hit with a guilty verdict for being an accessory to murder, and a bunch of other smaller charges from a messed up drug deal, and he's going to be locked up for a while. When you search Sean Warner, you find Sean Warner guilty on 12 counts including murder and racketeering. This doesn't pop up on background checks, but if you Google me, it's a whole trip. This is just a lot to unpack. You'd think having a quirky name would be the biggest issue here, but no, you've got a whole family crime drama unfolding in the background. It's like a true crime series, but with the added twist of being an unfortunate coincidence. I mean, how wild would that family reunion be? Hey, nice to see you. So, you're the cousin who didn't get tangled in a murder charge, right? That's a heavy weight to carry, though, sending some good vibes your way. Story 6. So, while I was dealing with some personal stuff, my assistant recommended a candidate. They passed the background check, but when I got back, I asked if anyone had done a deeper dive on this person before sending out the offer letter. Turns out, the background check totally missed that they were involved in an ongoing grand jury case related to some really serious stuff, like being accused of some pretty awful things with minors at a juvenile detention center a while back. They got a hush deal from the state because they were snitching on other counselors who were part of it, and there were multiple victims over 20 years. For some reason, this info didn't come up with the company we were using for checks. We've since ditched that company. Story 7. Honestly, it's wild what people will apply for. What really blows my mind are the candidates for jobs that are super relevant, and I'm just like, wait, you actually thought this was a good move? So, you're going for an accounting gig? Well, you might want to steer clear of credit card issues, stealing, and, mishandling funds. Looking to work in childcare? That's a big red flag with the whole child safety thing. Want to be a kid's photographer? Sketchy behavior with minors is a hard no. And if the job involves a lot of flying around the world, yikes, you might end up on the FBI no-fly list. But the craziest part? Those folks get super bummed when I break the news about why they didn't snag the job. Honestly, though, they're the ones I feel the least sorry for. Story 8. I run a bunch of background checks for all sorts of stuff, including folks wanting to be foster parents. For pretty much all the other checks, I barely ever have anything to report back, but with those applying to foster, it can pile up to over 75 pages of police contact that I have to hand over. It's super tough to deal with, and honestly, some of the things I've come across in their backgrounds have brought me to tears. I really wish I could just slap a big no on some of them. Like, seriously, 9 out of 10 applicants have police contact that's serious enough to show up in the background check. Story 9. So, this girl used to be in the adult film industry. She worked her way through college as a dancer before jumping on the OF train and had done a couple of films too. We learned about her past, but decided to bring her on board anyway. Honestly, she was an awesome team member, never caused any issues. She had a pick at her desk with Ron Jeremy, but it wasn't anything too wild or inappropriate. It was pretty amusing watching people try to remember how they recognized him. Story 10. Not exactly a background check, but I was helping out with some initial interviews for a starter job. One of the questions was whether she had any experience with this kind of work. She said she did and went on to explain that she got let go because she got involved with her boss. When he wrote her up for something, she went to HR to get it wiped off her record by using her connection with him as leverage. When I mentioned our strict rules about relationships with management, she put her hand on my knee and asked if there was anything she could do to change my mind about hiring her. Yeah, no thanks. That kind of not-so-subtle lack of professionalism isn't what we're about here, lady. Story 11. Not HR or anyone who does background checks, but like 13, 14 years ago, I was running the grill at a fast food joint. So this new gal who was the lobby person greeter gave off some seriously sketchy vibes. I checked out her application, and it had like 2 pages where she explained why she had a criminal record. Turns out she'd been convicted of some pretty serious child-related crimes, but claimed she found God in prison and turned her life around. I was totally shocked the hiring manager brought her on as a lobby person. I told her she could clock out, that she wasn't needed anymore. The next day, the hiring manager pulled me into the office when I showed up. The new lady and the general manager were there too. The GM asked why I let her go, so I grabbed the application off the desk and handed it to him. He read it and had the same look of disgust I think I had when I first saw it. Then he told the new lady that, yep, she was fired. After that, he laid into the hiring manager pretty hard, LOL. That's just a lot to unpack, isn't it? Like, nothing says welcome to your meal quite like a resume detailing your past felonies. Pretty sure found God doesn't come with a satisfaction guarantee for working in fast food. Honestly, it's wild that someone thought that was a good idea to disclose. Like, usually you just put your hobbies on the application, not your criminal history. Imagine the conversations that must have happened in the break room after that. Story 12. So, we're not in HR or anything, but we looked up his name online and found a news story featuring him and his wife involved in a court case about some shady business. He did awesome in the interview, but we figured there's no way he'd clear a background check after that search. Not that it kicked her out of the running, but then we stumbled upon her page offering some, let's say, unique services, with her pic in a tiny leather outfit and holding a whip. Quite the interesting side hustle. Story 13. So, there was this woman who threw her hat in the ring for tax collector in my town, trying to kick out someone who'd been in the gig forever. When I looked her up, I discovered she had a history of tax fraud and had been found guilty of it. She was all about this integrity campaign, too. Thank goodness she didn't win. She got totally crushed. Story 14. I was working in HR in a union setting, dealing with some pretty sensitive situations. One of the folks on the front lines recommended her grandkid's baby mama. Her resume looked decent, she aced the interview, and her references were solid. When I made the verbal offer, I let her know it was all good but depended on a background check. We're not super strict, just as long as it's not a serious crime that could put vulnerable people in danger. She mentioned she had something on her record, and I thought it was probably something minor, like a theft under $5,000. Then she dropped the bomb that it was for smuggling drugs across the border. She totally freaked out because I had to pull the offer. The person who referred her was also pretty upset about the whole situation. Story 15. So I had our recruiter at work bring in this dude with a super unique name. When we had him in for his final interview, one of my coworkers was all like, "You can't hire him." And she looked really freaked out. Turns out, After chatting with her and doing a quick search, he had some pretty serious charges against him, including statutory stuff and a bunch of other sketchy things. The girl involved was actually one of her close friends, and she was barely 17. Honestly, I don't even get why we have recruiters or why they act like they do background checks. We also had another guy who was convicted of the same thing, and he was the getaway driver in a school shooting. Plus, he was involved in selling guns illegally. Not totally sure if I'm using the right term, but you get the idea. Story 16. A new employee got hooked on fentanyl, and sadly, her baby passed away after getting into it. She was actually a top pick for a project manager role, got hired, but then they pulled the offer. She ended up in jail, but is now working in addiction recovery. You'd never guess that, just by meeting her. Story 17. So there was this dude we interviewed who sounded solid on paper, but he had this huge gap in his resume that he was clearly dodging. My coworker and I got this odd vibe about him, so we decided to look him up online. Turns out we found this article that said he had seriously hurt his ex-girlfriend while she was holding their baby, who was only a month old. This was for a job where he'd be working with non-verbal autistic folks. We ultimately decided to pass on him and gave a heads up to other agencies in the area about what we found. That escalated quickly, like we went from a meh interview to a horror movie plot twist in seconds. Imagine hiring that guy and then having him working with vulnerable people. Yikes. Props to you and your coworker for the detective work, though. It's wild how a little internet sleuthing can save the day. Always trust your gut, especially when it's screaming at you. Story 18. I run a little business, and most times I just look up applicants online. Over the past couple of years, I've come across some wild stuff for real. One guy showed up for trying to rob a bank. Another was linked to a crew that was out here scamming folks with phone calls and emails. Story 19. Not HR, but IT here. So we had this new dude join us a couple months back while HR was doing their background check. Turns out he didn't pass, and I had to shut down all his access. HR wouldn't spill the tea on what they found, but they kinda hinted that anyone could just Google his name, if you catch my drift. I went to lunch and decided to look him up. Turns out he got caught up in a pretty serious sting operation back in 2019 and did some time. He was one of like 20 guys who got caught. Peace out, dude. Story 20. So, this isn't about me, but a buddy I used to work with. He's from a neighborhood that had a ton of Italian-American folks moving in about a century ago. There's another dude from his town who has the exact same first and last name, but they're not even related. And he's kind of a shady character with a bunch of minor run-ins with the law for stuff like petty theft. If you search up my law-abiding coworker, you'll end up seeing all the news about that other guy with the same name getting into trouble. Eventually, he started his own business, and it was pretty obvious they were totally different people. Story 21. I don't really do background checks for my biz right now, but here's the scoop. Boring answer. Even if the job listing says you need a degree, unless you're going for a teaching gig or fresh out of college, there's a good chance your background check won't verify your degree. If you've got the real-world experience and you're the right fit for the role, definitely go for it, no matter what the degree rules say. Fun answer. So, there was this one time in an interview when I asked a candidate about learning from a mistake, and she totally dropped a bomb about being mixed up in a judicial scandal. Maybe she thought that would pop up in the background check. Honestly, I wouldn't have known if it did. But wow, did she give me a ton of details I didn't even ask for. Story 22. So, there was this dude who got nailed for, hurting a patient at the hospital where he worked. He kept saying that after doing his time, he was a totally different person. But we figured since we're a hospital too, it just wasn't worth the gamble. Story 23. So, there was this candidate who totally crushed the interview and was basically set to get the job, right? Then I got this heated call out of nowhere. Turns out someone did a quick search on him, and his nickname was kinda wild, like Frisky Fred or something along those lines. Apparently he had this side hustle in local politics, but he got into some trouble for being a little too touchy with some coworkers in a parking garage. So this guy was cruising into a job like, I've got this in the bag, and then, boom, Google reveals his alter ego, Horny Horace. Honestly, this is peak chaos energy. Like, Who thought running for local office while being publicly known as a groping menace was a good idea? It's almost impressive how some people are so bad at life choices. I mean, you can't just hit the like button on your own resume and expect it to stick. Just a reminder that one cringeworthy nickname can ruin your whole career vibe. Good luck finding a new side hustle, horny Horace. Story 24. So, on his first day at work, the HR peeps called up to say they got his drug test results back, and he totally flunked it. Yeah, meth. His training got cut short, and they escorted him out, telling him to check out of his hotel and switch his flight home. Totally on him for the cost. Fast forward a few months, and the next dude for the same gig was just 2 weeks into training when HR found out he was facing a felony charge for theft that was about to wrap up in court. We really picked some real champs, huh? Story 25. So, I don't work a regular job, but I run an animal rescue, and you wouldn't believe how many folks with animal cruelty records try to adopt pets. Nah, I'm not about to send an animal I've put so much work into saving to a home where the last pets didn't make it because they were neglected. Story 26. It's less about doing a background check and more about being a little curious. The company couldn't find new hires, so they ditched the background checks. This new guy was giving off some weird vibes, so I decided to look him up, and turns out he's got a record as a offender. He's still working there because there's not much they can do about it at this point. That's a solid case for having background checks, right? Like, what's next? Are they just going to hire a circus clown off the street because they're short-staffed? I get that desperate times call for desperate measures, but putting a registered offender on the team? That's a whole new level of just wing it. Might want to keep pepper spray on hand in the break room. Seriously though, that's super sketchy, and I can't even imagine how awkward the workplace vibes must be. Story 27. So, a dude rolled in to apply for a job. He mentioned he had a bit of a rough patch in his past, but it wasn't anything major. Turns out he did 12 years for a serious crime involving 2 minors when he was just 19. Now, he's out on bail while waiting for another trial related to that same serious situation. Story 28. Not HR and not some background check. I was the social media guy. I stumbled upon some wild posts roasting the company from 2 new hires. So, our CEO held a meeting right in the lobby. We basically had an extended lunch and then got back to our usual grind. Later that day, I was heading back to my desk. After a quick bathroom break, when I opened up my phone to see what was popping on social media, I clicked on LinkedIn, and surprise, surprise, I had a bunch of messages in my inbox, which was pretty out of the ordinary. Now, here's the thing. The lobby also served as a demo space for our products, and when the doors were shut, it meant a demo was happening. There were no windows to peek through. After the meeting, those doors were closed. Turns out, it wasn't just for a demo. Most of the messages I got were empty, just links to other posts. These videos and pics shot in the lobby showed employees in some pretty questionable poses, twerking, making fun of the CEO's earlier speech, sitting and standing on top of expensive products, and dancing around like they were doing a striptease on them. And they were totally throwing shade at the company and its leadership. They even got the company name and the CEO's name all wrong on purpose. Funny enough, these new hires were connected to some friends of friends with several people in the company, just not me. The info spread through DMs like wildfire. My coworkers sent me the scoop because they didn't trust HR, but they knew I was the social media guy. The posts were all public, so when I opened the links, I took screenshots. There were almost a dozen posts, on LinkedIn of all places. Why? Instead of heading back to my desk, I went straight to HR, who then rushed to the exec team. Those newbies got the boot quick after that. I never saw them leave, but I later heard that 1. They had to take down those posts. 2. They were temp workers from a third-party company that had strict social media rules. They were only around for 7 business days and probably lost their gigs at the temp agency too. 3. The CEO personally fired them in his office. 4. According to some office gossip, they left in tears after getting chewed out, while others said the CEO barely said much besides showing his disappointment. Story 29. I'm not really the type to dig into background checks, but I got a gig at a government office doing admin stuff. There was this guy in another department who was bouncing, and they asked me to help out with some of his tasks while they looked for someone to replace him. I was cool with that, so I followed him around for a couple of weeks. Honestly, I wasn't a fan of the guy. He talked to me like I was a little kid. Everything was in this weird sing-songy voice, and he would explain stuff in a super odd way. One time, I wore a shirt with dinosaurs on it, and he leaned over me with his hands on his knees and was like, "Whoa, dinosaurs? Like Jurassic Park? You know Jurassic Park, right? It's a movie. It's got dinosaurs. You should totally check it out. But it's a bit scary. Make sure you have some cartoons lined up after, okay? Just so you know, I'm over 30, and he was probably in his mid to late 30s too. This dude just had such a bizarre vibe and gave off some serious creepiness. Anyway, I decided to look him up just out of curiosity. And guess what? The first thing that pops up is a mugshot. Turns out he had some sketchy stuff going on in high school and ended up going to college late. He even joined a frat at 28. The guys in the frat said he was super weird, but let him in because he was down to buy them drinks. Then, at one party, the house got raided when 2 girls were found passed out inside. His room was packed with drugs, including some that could knock out 2 girls, hypothetically. He somehow dodged any serious charges by claiming the drugs were for personal use to boost his school performance, which sounds like rich kid talk to me. Anyway, how he landed a job at the government agency blows my mind. What's even crazier is he was leaving us for a better job at another government spot. That dude gave me the major creeps. Story 30. So, not me, but a buddy of mine works at this place that actually hires folks who've been in the slammer, giving them a chance to start fresh. But there are a couple of issues, you know? First off, he gets applications where people check no when asked, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" But then their background checks tell a totally different story. Boom, automatic no-go. They know a check's coming, so why even bother lying? My friend just doesn't want to deal with it, so it's peace out for them. The second issue is with anyone who's done serious stuff, or those on the offender list. He's had people say yes to the question, but then get all sketchy about what they were in for. It's usually a pretty bad deal. Story 31. I can't even explain how much of a heads up this one needs. So, while I was working with the local sheriff's department, I would sometimes lend a hand to the background check crew. We had this dude in his late 20s, married with a couple of kids, who worked at his family's little furniture shop in town. They were super devoted Mormons, and honestly, it was the only gig he ever had. We weren't really expecting to uncover much, so they passed it along to me. Everything was chill until we hit the polygraph test. And I mean question W15. Have you ever been with animals? Sure enough, his no answer came back as shady, which isn't totally wild since that question can throw people off. So we strapped him back in and tossed a couple of control questions at him, but the machine still gave us the same shady vibes. Long story short, he ended up confessing to being with chickens, which earned him the nickname Chicken Focker around the office. After that, he also mentioned he'd been with a horse, but said the last time was with a cat, and that ended badly for him with some injuries. He claimed to have recorded these moments, so while I kept chatting him up, my coworkers were busy writing up search warrants for all his electronics at home and work. You should have seen the look of shock on his wife's and dad's faces on the body cams. It was priceless. Eventually, he quietly pled guilty to some charges and took off out of state. That took a serious turn pretty quick. I can't even imagine the kind of stuff investigators come across. Sounds like an episode of a crime show that you really don't want to binge late at night. It's wild how much we can miss just looking at someone's surface. If someone's whole life is about to fall apart, it's easy to be blindsided by it. Props to you for dealing with that chaos. I've got my share of college drama, but nothing like that. Keep doing what you're doing, though. It's important work, even if it's heavy as heck. Story 32. So, during this group job application session, someone's phone just vanished, right? They looked high and low, but couldn't find it anywhere. So, everyone figured it must have been swiped by someone in the room, and the trainer thought it was a good idea to call the cops. Just when the police were about to roll in, some dude suddenly found the phone under his chair. Spoiler alert, he didn't get the job. Story 33. So, I'm not in HR or anything, but a while back, I was working at this big telecom company, and my team got a new dude who had an absolutely killer resume, like Ivy League stuff from Yale and Oxford, which is pretty rare where I'm from. Honestly, the job seemed kinda low-key for someone with his credentials, so naturally, I decided to look him up online. I found out he had given politics a shot a few years back, but had to drop out because some messy stuff came out about him. He was charged, but not convicted, for allegedly messing with his ex-wife. I stumbled upon this news article that detailed his arrest. Apparently, he got really upset that his ex wasn't hyped enough about a new job, so he dragged her by her hair across a parking lot. Yikes. This info wasn't hard to uncover, but it seemed like the hiring team at my company totally missed it. I brought it up to my boss's assistant, and she passed it along to my boss. He freaked out and pulled me into a room, begging me not to spill the beans to anyone. I ended up bouncing a couple of months later, and as a parting gift, I told my coworkers to Google him. The guy was not a favorite, so I didn't mind making his life a little awkward. Fast forward a year or two later, someone asked about him, and I checked his Google results again. All those news articles about his arrest and the election dropout were totally wiped. Somebody did a seriously good job cleaning up his image. Story 34. Messing with a body, so their partner had a bad overdose, and instead of dialing up the cops since they were also using at that moment, they brought the body back home. Turns out, just doing that can land someone a felony charge and over a decade behind bars. This is some serious, I definitely made a bad choice energy right here. Like, moving a body? That's straight out of a crime documentary. Can you imagine the police showing up and being like, "So, about that body you moved?" Just a casual chat, right? Not even gonna pretend like I understand the logic behind thinking, "Yeah, let's just keep this on the down low." But hey, lessons learned, folks. Don't commit felonies to avoid a trip to the station. No cap. Just really sad all around. Story 35. So, we brought on this dude who totally nailed the interviews, had an awesome resume, and looked like he'd fit right in with our crew. But for some reason, our background checks take forever. Like, this guy was already halfway through 6 weeks of training when his check finally came back. Once the word got out that the backgrounds were coming in, he started acting all jittery and way too talkative about everything. Then, during a break, he just blurted out that he thought he wouldn't pass his background check because he got framed for something he didn't even do. To make a long story short, he was charged with some serious stuff, but he claimed he didn't actually do it. Apparently, someone from his apartment complex was messing with his Wi-Fi. Anyway, he got let go, and we're still trying to handle the fallout from all of this. Story 36. One of the cousins of a current worker decided to take a lie detector test to join the police force. He confessed in a recorded chat that he once slathered peanut butter on his private area and let his dog have a taste. Honestly, if I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. Story 37. Ran a liquor store, and there were 2 of us. We looked up all the applications online. The worst one was a dude who claimed he was a self-employed handyman. But according to the news, he got busted about 2 months ago for being a big-time local drug dealer. Then there were a few folks who applied and had DUIs, but one of them actually took someone's life. Story 38. I usually do a quick Google check on people who apply. I found one dude who got busted for messing around with cows not once, but twice. I was kinda curious to meet him just for the laughs, but in the end, I didn't have time for that nonsense. Twice! Story 39. Not HR. So, I was doing my clinical rotations as a pharmacy student and got a little tip-off that one of the patients I was seeing had been locked up for about 15 years. Did a quick search on him and, yep, turns out he was in for some serious stuff. But honestly, he was the nicest dude. Story 40. So, not me, but a buddy of mine interviewed this dude who was about to start some side gigs at a few apartment buildings. You know, fixing things up and stuff. Out of the blue, my friend gets a call from his old boss, and it turns out a tenant recognized this guy and tipped them off. Not sure if they worked together or just knew him from somewhere, but they figured out he was going to be working there and were like, "Oh no." Long story short, the guy got fired because he was discovered squatting in one of the empty duplexes for like 3 to 6 months. They're not totally sure how long he was in there. At the same place he used to work back in the 90s. This was in the late 2000s when my friend was chatting with him. He had been, relieving himself in the broken sinks and toilets. No clue where he was handling the other business. The building needed a ton of work, so they were just keeping the lawn mowed for nearly a year. No power and no running water either. They found a sleeping bag and a trash can that was mostly empty, but the whole place smelled like, well, you can imagine, a mix of old, funky odors. You know that smell when you forget to flush? Now, imagine that, but for 3 to 6 months. The previous owner of the duplex said he couldn't even step inside. He had to hold his breath and dash out. The scent clung to his clothes, and he said it was worse than roadkill, like legit toxic. So my friend was already out on hiring him. Then me, him, and another friend decided to look him up. And surprise, surprise, he had a criminal record, a lengthy one mostly filled with domestic issues throughout the 80s and 90s. Then it suddenly stopped in the late 90s, and we were like, what happened? Oh, he must have been in prison. Honestly, if I were squatting in a place without running water, I'd just use some bottles for that and toss them when they're full. Or just step outside. For real, if I were in his shoes, I'd just tell the owner I needed a spot to crash, offer to work on the place myself, and negotiate some sort of payment plan. But, yeah, he was probably also using, which is likely where. So, your friend's about to hire this guy, and suddenly it turns into the apartment creep show. It's like a plot twist nobody asked for. I mean, it's kind of wild how someone's past can just come knocking like that. Like, did the tenant have a spidey sense or something? At this point, maybe just send a warning email to all potential hires. If you have a sketchy past, just stay home and binge watch Netflix instead.